Hello and welcome to the Now What Next Steps podcast here at Malibu Pacific Church. It's me, Joel, and I just wanted to say, hey, thank you for listening. But if you haven't listened to this past Sunday service yet, or the sermon, please press pause on this podcast as it will make no sense. Just kidding, it'll make a little bit of sense. And I don't want to tell you how to live your life, but for reals, I think go back and listen to this past Sunday's sermon because today we're going to be taking a deep dive into that sermon. We have our special guest. You're not even a special guest anymore. Everybody, we have Amy here with us who gave an amazing sermon because that's what it's about, right?
Oh, yeah. All about us. It's all about
It's
us.
all about us. Me, and that sermon. So we're in our series, Teach Me How to Pray. And Amy did session number 3. So going into this session, hearing part 1, part 2, did you know where you were going to be going with this sermon for months before, or was it kind of like, oh, this is really cool from these past 2 sermons? It gave you kind of a clear direction.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of, I knew that I was getting to take the portion where we get to ask God for things. Yes, because I'm good at asking God for things.
Sweet.
But I didn't know really exactly how we would get there until I got to hear the first 2. But I loved the first 2. I think that this series has been super profound, and I just keep reflecting over the idea of intimacy that Chad brought up the first week, and then week 2, that idea of, our Father and the fact that we get to approach our Father who's holy and mighty, and that it's thy will instead of my will. And I just keep thinking about those words, like, is this about me and my will, or is this about you, God, and what you want? And
Absolutely.
So
what was going through your head right before you were about to preach? Bumper videos playing, you have your notes, you feel like you have to move a table and a chair. What was going through your mind?
Oh, you know what?
Huh.
I was thinking about how ridiculously amazing our worship experience was today.
Oh my god.
Like, it was so powerful last Sunday. It was just, it's always incredible. We have such an amazing worship team, but something about every moment of the morning just felt like God had seamlessly sewn it together. And someone asked me, Amy, did you plan the whole thing so it would all tie together like that? And I'm like, absolutely not. Joel planned it, and we planned it, and we didn't talk, and God just put it all together in all the pieces. And so I think that's kind of actually what I was thinking about. It took a little pressure off me just to be like, hey, God's already doing something, so He's not going to fail us now.
Absolutely. And if you're shocked to hear that we plan some stuff, so are we. Don't worry. No, we really love to sit in those moments. But something that was really cool about that Sunday, too, I mentioned at the end of that service, the Claire de Lune classical piece by Debussy. That was just a beautiful mistake, actually. The team was just warming up to that. And it's a very difficult piece of music. And I was walking into the sanctuary hearing this magical piece, and I was just like, well, that's going in the service. Spoiler alert, it's not a worship song, but it is something that will inspire you to explore faith. I really do believe that.
I agree.
So
it was very inspirational on Sunday.
Totally was. All right, so that was what was going on before as you were walking into the sermon. And now I think all of us really want to get down to like the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
Are you and your mom okay after the skydiving? Okay, did you guys reconcile after that?
We did.
You guys still don't like each other?
I told her about it after my feet were firmly planted on the ground.
Perfect.
But and I think her response was, "I'm really glad I didn't know that you were going to do that." Mm-hmm. So she listened in on Sunday and said, I still can't believe you did that.
Still got called out.
Oh,
that's so good. Okay, so we're in the Lord's Prayer, and you kind of took the back half of it.
Yes.
So was it easier? Was it harder? Because it's not a lot of scripture to pull from, but it truly is super deep.
Yes.
So you just had, I would say, a couple lines, couple sentences.
Yep, a couple sentences, yep.
Was it hard to pull a 35-minute sermon out of just a couple sentences? Or was it something that you were like, no, I could go?
I think that even though it was short, there was so much content in there. Cool. They were like really dense sentences. So the idea of, our daily needs and how God wants to meet us there. And then the idea of forgiveness, which is, there's been lots of sermons just on the idea of forgiveness, and then the idea of forgiving someone else, which
Yeah.
I didn't cover much because we've got Luke Zamprini this week. And so we want to hear from him about that. And then the idea of like temptation and evil and being protected from that. And that could be like a 1-year sermon series right there.
Yep.
And so I think the most difficult thing was figuring out how to do it justice without spending 6.5 hours on Sunday morning. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all laughed very hard at one of your really fast, quippy jokes about daily bread. And you
Yes.
said, "Is bread even a thing anymore?" That was so Malibu, and I'm celiac, so I was laughing really hard because I'm like, bread is not a thing anymore, and I like snapped my finger. So it was pretty good. So that was fun. All right, so you're going through your sermon. You had some amazing points, and can you go over the 3 main points that you're going over one more time?
Yeah, I think kind of the through line is the idea that we get to come before God because he cares and he can, that he cares about our needs and he invites us to ask for them, and then he can do it. Like he has the power and ability to do it. And then so the 3 things were, we get to ask him for our daily bread, which stands for, our physical need. What are the things that we need to get through the day? Like, what do we need physically, emotionally, spiritually to get through the day? And then the need for forgiveness and to forgive others. And then the need to be protected from protection, basically. So, bread, forgiveness, and protection are the 3 items that were pulled out of that passage.
Absolutely. So in that prayer, Lord's Prayer, which one did you grow up with? Because I think that you did an amazing job with that pivot, because a lot of the time people don't talk about the different translations of that prayer.
Yeah.
Because it's fun. I kind of laugh being like a church kid and like growing up and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
When we say the Lord's Prayer together and it's not on a screen or written down somewhere.
Right.
Because it's like in that moment, people are like, and then forgive us our...
Yep.
So which one did you grow up with, and what, or you take?
So I grew up with the debts and debtors
Okay.
one, yeah, but it was funny because even as I was reciting it in practice before we had it on the screen, I was saying it in a different version than the one we put up on the screen. So I was like, okay, read it, don't say it from memory. But yeah, I grew up on that debts and debtors, and
Yeah. So why do you think the church has adapted those different words inside of that moment? I know that's a very theological, hard question.
yeah, I mean, I think it goes down to there's different Bible translations,
Totally.
and different ones think they're more accurate. I think I think the translation that I grew up in a pretty modern church. We would sometimes even use the Message on Sunday mornings, and I know.
Whoa! Dun dun dun! It's okay. We're all forgiven persons. I'm totally kidding. I use the Message all the time. I go back and forth. I usually use NIV, then the Message whenever I preach, or with the youth because it's easy.
Because it's easy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think that idea, transgressions, that's not really a word that we use very often.
While you're shaking your head.
Trespasses, it's like
Totally.
we don't even really, do we even have no trespassing signs anymore? There's just not very many places, maybe up on the hill, but but other than that, those words just aren't comfortable words that we know. And so debts and debtors is a great way to say it, except that it does bring up that financial piece of like, but I think that gives the clarity of there is something that's owed, that the sin that was allowed into the world actually does have a payment that has to be paid. And
Totally.
yeah, but as I said on Sunday, I don't like the word sin. I don't like that concept. And yet there's no other way to get around it.
Totally.
We can be like, oh, it's a mistake, and then someone does it to you, and you're like, that is not a mistake, that was willful, that was not okay, and all of a sudden our perception of that concept changes.
It's I like that you went down that trail of not liking the word sin or
Uh-huh.
that kind of thing, because it brought me back to another thought. When Terrell was preaching like a year and a half ago or so. It's been a while, but I
Yeah.
mean he preached all the time. But he's like, "I'm a sinner. I'm not a mistaker."
Yes. Yeah.
Like, just straight. And I've heard that before, but it's just something that really was like, whoa, that connection, even to a year or so ago, was so there. But
Yeah.
what do you think, happened that, like in your life or your walk, to not like the word sin, or it's just like too hard or too, I don't know.
I think part of it is that had I worked a lot in children's ministry, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so there were families. So I was teaching chapel at a school, and
Mm-hmm.
at the school there's all these families that don't have a relationship with Jesus. They don't know anything about God. And
Yeah.
so when their kids come home and say this word sin, like they're angry and upset, and they feel like we're putting shame and guilt on their kids, and they're attributing
Mm-hmm.
things to it that weren't there. So I was always sensitive to try to explain it in a way that they could carry home without shame and guilt, and without rising those things up in their parents. And so I think that was part of it. But certainly in my own life, like, I think that's the interesting part, is in my own life I could never own it as a mistake and not a sin.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are those moments I have in my life where I'm like, it wasn't a mistake. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I actively chased after that. I wanted that. I moved toward it. It was,
Yeah.
I thought I was this person, and then I did this and realized about myself that I actually did need a savior. And
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to someone last night, and she was just talking about her self-righteousness was her sin.
Mm-hmm.
And just having that moment where God highlighted that for her. And I think we can sit in a place and think, oh, I haven't done this sin or this sin that are the big ones, which
Totally.
the Bible never has any categories for any of our sins. But
Yeah.
we stare in the face of pride or self-righteousness or these things and think, well, but everybody has that a little bit.
That's
And
fine. Yeah.
and so I think that's where, it comes back to, no, actually, we have this standard of perfection, and yet, and for some reason God has to uphold that. And I think we can see that because we don't want, that's where it comes into contact with someone else. We don't want someone else to, like, we don't want someone else to do something against us, right? We're like, why does it have to be this perfection until the wrong is done against us? And then we need it. We need perfection. We need justice. We need that,
Yeah.
right? And that's why I think why God has to uphold that perfection. And yet he's like, but I care about you so much that to uphold this, I'm going to come help you. Like, you can't do it. And I know that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to be the solution. Like, I really want to be the solution for you. And so
Yeah.
I think that's where the gospel is so profound, because I think we want to say God can just, like, look past it. It's not important
Mm-hmm.
until the wrong is done against us, and then we don't want him to look past it. And so I think it's good for us to look that in the face.
Absolutely. I love that you're talking about your children's director and work with
Yes.
children's and chapel and all that stuff too. And I love your approach with those kids. I think we need to take that approach with all non-believers.
Right.
Personally, that's a hill I'm willing to die on.
Yes.
There's too many times that I've seen believers go after non-believers and be like, "How dare you sin? How dare you live in that?"
Right.
And they don't even know who Jesus is. Never even heard that. Never sat
Right.
down with somebody. So how could we, as Malibu Pacific Church, do that not just for the children, but for the non-believers in this world?
Well, I think the biggest thing is we need to stop asking non-believers to live by the standard of Christ.
Ooh.
So, yeah, I mean, we expect people who are not following Jesus to believe that his ways of life are best, and that's just kind of absurd.
Totally is.
So I think we need to stop doing that, and we need to just come alongside people and walk with them. And we know that life is going to, I do believe that God reveals himself in the world, in our hearts, that he makes it known. And I think there's a natural law that's written on our heart. And I think that when we do sin or struggle, like there's this moment where I think all of people, even who don't follow Jesus, are going to come up against that feeling. And then that's the moment where we get to be there. And they're going to say, well, the bottom dropped out for me. Is there something bigger? It's that, like, there's no atheist in a foxhole. Like, are you going to be there when somebody has the bottom drop out for them? And how can we love and, how can you love and support them and not? So instead of going after their behavior currently, it's just walking alongside them in life and showing them your choices and letting them wrestle with the, like, why do you choose to live like that? That's weird. Why are you so nice to me when I'm mean sometimes? And why are you,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so if we can do that as a church, that'd be awesome, because we have that giant banner outside, and it's our words. This is a church for everybody and every story.
Yes.
And every story gets messy fast.
Yes, it sure does.
But this needs to be a sanctuary for everybody and every story. All right, so you're landing the sermon, and it's awesome. People are cheering. Babies are laughing. 5,000 baptisms happen. No, you're landing the sermon. Later on that day, was there anything that was going through your mind that you wish you would have said?
Ooh.
Or was there some that did you just live in peace, I guess? And be like, no, it is what it is. It's all good. That sounds like a trap, but it's not. I promise.
I know.
Like, oh, I
I'm just trying to think about it. No, I there were a couple parts that I had written down that I didn't say, but I felt like there was some providence in that there was just that what was said was great. I think I said it, but pretty minimally. And I tagged it on at the end because I didn't say it in the middle, but this idea of that we can think that, I'm going to use big Christian words for a second. Like, we think that sanctification, so the process of, so sanctification is choosing to be more like Christ, like the process of being made more like Christ. And we can think that basically once we've said yes to Jesus, once we'd have this conversion, if we want to use that word, which I think is a little bit tricky because I think we're always choosing Christ more every day. I don't think it's necessarily just this one moment, but we can think that God just leaves us on our own to figure out how to live life as a good person, or I'm making little air quotes here, or as a Christ-like person. And the reality is that, and I use the illustration of skydiving, and I said, it would be like the instructor just jumping off my back once the chute was pulled, right? Like having his own chute and be like, okay, you're good. You got it. Now figure out like which field to land on and make sure you know how to turn it right, and don't break your leg, and make sure you run well. And it's just absurd, right? It would be absurd if he did that. I would die probably because I wouldn't have done the right thing. I'd like land on a freeway. But that somehow, that is what we can think of our Christian life sometimes, is that it's up to us. And so I wanted to kind of nail that in a little bit more of God invites us to lean on him every day as we make all of our decisions, as we live our life. Like, he wants to be intimately involved in all the details of our life. And so I kind of tacked it on at the end, and maybe would have liked to give that a tiny bit more breathing space.
Totally. Yeah, I think sanctification, that's a whole series in itself, right?
Yep.
And the righteous and unrighteous, and what you think you've done and not done. And it's about you. It's not.
Right. And motives as well as actions.
Things. Yeah. There's this, when you were talking about that, it just reminded me of Francis Chan's Crazy Love.
Yes.
When he talks about why Christians have pissed off a lot of non-Christians in the sanctification process.
Yeah.
Because we go up to people telling them what they should do. And that's kind of going back to what we were saying earlier.
Yep.
But then they don't walk the walk themselves. They just think that they're sanctified because they are doing it. It's not of
Right.
Christ. It's like, and he gives this amazing visual. He's like, pretend someone, you're talking to them, and they said that they were just running on a freeway and were hit by a semi-truck. And you're talking to them, right? But they look just normal, right? Would you believe them?
No. Yeah.
And he goes, so why should a non-believer believe in you saying that you're sanctified through the Holy Spirit, through Jesus? What's it really going to take? You're going to have to look like you got hit by a semi-truck. Granted, that's a very like crazy visual or whatnot, but that's something that stuck with me, because if we're walking around saying, no, I'm a Christian, blah, 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 but not actually getting our hands dirty.
Right.
What are we really doing?
Well, and I think that is the big crisis of our day.
Ooh.
I really think it is, because I think we've spent all this time through the last, this is not a popular opinion, but the last few decades saying discipleship is information. Ooh. And we study and we know stuff, but the transformative overflow of our hearts and our lives isn't happening around us, and that's why Christianity is not compelling to people. And so it's wild, but I think Malibu Pacific is doing an amazing job at this in the smallest ways. Like even just our church saying we sponsor our Little League because we believe that what's happening in our community is important. And I'm not saying that discipleship is sponsoring Little League, but what I am saying is that the more that we encounter Christ and we are actually looking like the person who's been hit by the truck, right? Yeah. Then the more that people are going to want to hear from us. And I think just us inviting in an elementary school to watch a movie here, us showing up on the Little League fields, us going to games in the community is just a small way of saying we are for you in all the ways. We're for you in all the seasons, not just for you spiritually, but for the whole person life of Malibu.
Totally. And it's not just I'll be able to disciple somebody or bring them to Jesus if I just get a little more information. If I can just, It's actually the rubber meets the road. It's doing this together. And I agree with you with that unpopular opinion. I think we've been stuck in our headspace for so long that we just keep going, okay, if we just get to that next thing, then I'll be ready to go out there and do it. Right. Then I'll be ready to go into the community. Let's just keep inviting them here. If they keep coming here, then it's good, okay? But instead, we need to go out. Yeah. And so, I totally agree with that. And I do agree. It's something really cool is happening here at Malibu Pacific. It is. And God has always been at work here, but there's something about the season right now that is just so sweet. And the discipleship aspect, it's key. It really is key. And I'm glad you're in charge of that here. So don't screw it up.
Don't mess it up. I know.
So this is really awesome. Amy, thank you for just your heart and your passion for this place and just for people. For people. That's more important than a building. So you care about the actual church. So which is
people.
Which
You're
is
right.
people.
Yes.
But two or more is church. Anyway, sorry. You have to carry it too. Yeah. Anyways, thank you so much for tuning in to Now What Next Steps podcast. We have new episodes coming out every single week. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or hand gestures, please send them in to office@malibupacific.church. Again, office@malibupacific.church. If we get any of those questions, we'd love to answer them here on the podcast Sunday morning through an email, text, or coffee, actually. Yeah. So let us know. And again, thank you so much for being a part of Malibu Pacific Church. We'll see you guys next Sunday. Bye.